The vastness of space stretched endlessly before Captain Arya Solis, a black ocean speckled with distant stars that shimmered like scattered diamonds. She stood tall on the bridge of the Aegis, her gaze steady as she looked out through the reinforced viewport. Around her, the colossal ships of the Celestial Concord loomed like ancient titans, their presence both magnificent and intimidating. These were the vessels of 30 alien civilizations, each one a testament to their species' power, ingenuity, and dominance in the galaxy. The Aegis, though sleek and efficient, was dwarfed by the grandeur surrounding it. It was one of only 5 human ships present, their modest size and understated design a stark contrast to the alien behemoths. The crystalline ships of the Orivans caught the light of a nearby star, refracting it into a kaleidoscope of colors that danced across their shimmering hulls. They looked like fragile, floating jewels, but there was an undeniable strength in their intricate design. To their left, the Velaran ships pulsed with an otherworldly glow, their bioluminescent hulls alive with shifting patterns of light. Each pulse seemed to ripple with a heartbeat, as though the ships themselves were living creatures, breathing in the cosmic expanse. And then there were the lunary vessels, massive, organic leviathans that seemed to defy the very principles of engineering. Their surfaces moved subtly, as if they were alive, their exteriors rippling like the skin of a great beast. They floated with an eerie grace, their presence both mesmerizing and unsettling. Despite the beauty and grandeur of the alien fleet, a heavy tension hung in the air inside the Aegis. The quiet hum of the ship's system seemed louder than usual, filling the silence with a low, steady vibration. The crew worked diligently, their movements precise, but their unease was palpable. They knew the eyes of the galaxy were upon them, watching, judging. At the center of it all stood Admiral Elias Kane, a man whose calm demeanor was as unshakable as the steel walls of the ship. His uniform was immaculate, his posture rigid, but there was a quiet intensity in his expression. He was a man who carried the weight of Earth's hopes on his shoulders, and he bore it without complaint. A transmission crackled through the ship's comm system, breaking the silence. The voice of High Commander Zyrith, leader of the Velarans, filled the room. It was deep and resonant, laced with a thinly veiled arrogance. Terra's fleet is modest, he said, the pause deliberate, his tone dripping with condescension. Why send such small vessels to a gathering of giants? The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but Admiral Kane remained composed. He leaned forward slightly, his voice steady and measured as he responded. We bring exactly what we need for a peaceful mission, High Commander. Zyrith's laughter echoed faintly over the transmission, a cold, metallic sound that seemed to linger in the air even after the line went silent. Standing nearby, Commander Victor Hale couldn't hide his frustration. They're laughing at us, he muttered under his breath, his voice low but edged with anger. Arya turned to him, her expression calm but her eyes sharp. A small, enigmatic smile played on her lips as she replied, "Let them laugh. Underestimation is a powerful weapon." As the Aegis and the other human ships moved closer to the Concorde's sprawling station, the scale of the structure became apparent. It was a massive, labyrinthine construct, its spires reaching out like the arms of some ancient celestial deity. Lights blinked across its surface, and streams of smaller ships zipped in and out of its many docking ports. The station was a city in space, a hub of power and diplomacy, and humanity's ships looked almost insignificant against its grandeur. But inside the Aegis, there was no insignificance. There was purpose. There was determination. Arya could feel it in the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat, in the quiet resolve of the crew around her. They were here not to cower before giants, but to stand among them. As the docking sequence began, Arya took one last look at the alien ships around them. Each one was a reminder of how far humanity still had to go, but also of how far they had already come. She turned back to face the bridge, her voice calm but firm as she issued her orders. Let's show them what Earth is capable of. The air inside the station was heavy with formality and tension, the kind that comes from the meeting of powerful beings who all believe themselves to be the center of the universe. The diplomatic talks had only just begun, the voices of the delegates echoing in the grand hall like the low murmur of distant thunder. But then, without warning, a shrill alarm shattered the fragile calm, cutting through the air like a blade. The sound was piercing, urgent, and it was followed almost immediately by the cold, mechanical voice of the station's warning system, alert. Hostile forces detected. Krithar Dominion fleet approaching. 30 vessels. Immediate action required. Panic rippled through the room. Delegates turned to each other, their faces pale, their voices overlapping in a chaotic cacophony of fear and confusion. The Krithar Dominion. The name alone carried weight, a shadow that loomed over the galaxy. They were a brutal, merciless species, their sole purpose to conquer and consume. Wherever they went, destruction followed. Outside the station, the void of space seemed to darken as the Krithar warships decloaked, their jagged, obsidian hulls emerging from the shadows like predators stalking their prey. Their ships were monstrous, designed for intimidation as much as for war. Spiked and angular, they looked more like weapons than vessels, their surfaces crackling with red energy that pulsed like veins. The Concorde fleet, massive and powerful though it was, hesitated. The alien ships, so large and majestic in their design, were not built for speed. They moved like ancient leviathans, slow to react, their crews scrambling to prepare for battle. But the human ships did not wait. Inside the Aegis, Captain Arya Solis stood at the center of the bridge, her voice calm but commanding as she issued orders. Bring us into position. Protect the diplomatic shuttle at all costs. The Aegis moved swiftly, its sleek form cutting through the void like an arrow. Around it, the other 4 human ships mirrored its movements, their coordination flawless, their intent clear. They were not here to run. They were here to fight. The Krithar, seeing the small human fleet moving to intercept them, opened fire. Their weapons unleashed beams of crimson energy, each one powerful enough to tear through steel and stone. The beams streaked across the darkness, aimed directly at the human ships. But the Aegis was ready. The ship's quantum resonance shield flared to life, a shimmering barrier of blue light that rippled like water. The Krithar's energy blasts struck the shield, but instead of piercing through, they were absorbed, their power dissipating harmlessly into the void. The light of the shield reflected off the hull of the Aegis, making it glow like a beacon in the darkness. The Krithar hesitated, their confidence faltering. They had expected the humans to crumble under their assault, but instead, their weapons had been rendered useless. The Sentinel, another human ship, seized the moment. From its hull, a beam of golden light shot forth, aimed directly at one of the Krithar destroyers. This was the Gravitic Lance, a weapon of terrifying precision. The beam struck the Krithar ship, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, the destroyer began to twist and contort, its hull crumpling inward as the lance manipulated the gravity around it. The ship was crushed like a tin can, its remains drifting lifelessly into the void. Inside the station, the alien delegates watched in stunned silence. The humans, those small, fragile beings they had dismissed as primitive, were holding their own against the Krithar. High Commander Zyroth, his bioluminescent skin glowing faintly with agitation, turned to Admiral Elias Kane, who stood calmly amidst the chaos. How are they doing this? Xyrath demanded, his voice tinged with disbelief. Admiral Kane did not answer immediately. He simply watched the battle unfold, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, "Humanity has always thrived in the face of adversity. We adapt. We innovate. And when pushed, we fight." The Krithar, enraged by their initial failure, intensified their assault. More energy blasts lit up the void, their crimson light reflecting off the hulls of the Concorde ships. But the human fleet moved with a precision that bordered on instinct. They weaved between the Krithar's attacks, their movements fluid and calculated. The Eclipse darted forward, its engines burning bright as it maneuvered behind enemy lines. From its hull, a swarm of small, glowing drones was released, each one no larger than a fist. The drones moved like a school of fish, weaving through the Krithar ships with eerie precision. They latched onto the enemy vessels, their tiny forms glowing brighter and brighter before detonating in bursts of white light. The Krithar ships shuddered under the assault, their hulls scarred and broken. The alien delegates continued to watch, their initial shock giving way to something else. "Ah! They're fighting as one," murmured an Oravan scientist, her crystalline skin shimmering faintly. "Their coordination, it's like they share a single mind." High Commander Xyrath said nothing, his glowing eyes fixed on the human fleet. For the first time, there was no condescension in his gaze. Only respect. Back on the Aegis, Captain Ariaso Lee stood firm, her hands gripping the railing as she watched the battle unfold. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her expression remained calm. She knew the stakes. This wasn't just a battle for survival. This was humanity's moment to prove itself, to show the galaxy what they were capable of. And as the Krithar ships began to falter, their once imposing fleet reduced to scattered wreckage, Arya allowed herself a small, fleeting smile. "Let them underestimate us," she murmured to herself. "It's the last mistake they'll ever make." The battle raged on, a symphony of chaos and destruction playing out in the vast emptiness of space. The Krithar, their pride wounded and their fury ignited, turned the full force of their fleet against the humans. Beams of crimson energy streaked through the void, their deadly light illuminating the battlefield like flashes of lightning in a storm. The Krithar ships moved with aggression, their jagged forms cutting through the darkness like predators closing in for the kill. But the humans did not falter. The Eclipse, sleek and dark as a shadow, suddenly shimmered with an unnatural light. Its hull seemed to ripple, like the surface of water disturbed by an unseen force. Then, before the Krithar could adjust their aim, the ship vanished. Not in the way of cloaking devices, which left faint distortions or traces. No, the Eclipse seemed to dissolve into the fabric of space itself, slipping out of reality as though it had never been there. The Krithar hesitated, their weapons firing blindly into the void where the ship had been. But it was no use. The Eclipse reappeared moments later inside the Krithar formation. It emerged like a phantom, its spectral phase drive allowing it to bypass the enemy's shields entirely. From its hull, beams of concentrated energy lashed out, striking at the vulnerable cores of the Krithar ships. One by one, the enemy vessels erupted in bursts of fire and debris, their destruction swift and merciless. On the station, the alien delegates watched in stunned silence. The Eclipse was unlike anything they had ever seen, its movements defying the laws of physics as they understood them. How is that possible?" whispered an Oravan scientist, her crystalline skin shimmering faintly as she leaned closer to the viewport. Her voice was filled with disbelief, her mind racing to comprehend what she was witnessing. But the humans were not done. The Odyssey, another of Earth's ships, moved into position. It was a graceful vessel, its sleek design almost deceptive in its simplicity. From its hull, a cloud of tiny, glittering objects began to pour out, like a swarm of fireflies released into the night. These were nano-drones, each one no larger than a grain of sand but armed with technology that was as precise as it was devastating. The swarm moved as one, a living wave of light that flowed through the battlefield with eerie grace. They darted toward the Krithar ships, slipping through cracks in their armor, bypassing their defenses with impossible ease. Once inside, the drones went to work. They severed power lines, disabled weapons systems, and scrambled communication arrays. The Krithar ships, once so menacing, now drifted helplessly in the void, their systems reduced to chaos. The Krithar commanders roared in frustration, their voices filled with rage and disbelief. They had come expecting an easy victory, a chance to crush the humans and assert their dominance. But instead, they were being outmaneuvered, outmatched, and humiliated. How can such small ships wield such power? The Oravan scientist murmured again, her voice trembling with awe. High Commander Zyroth, his bioluminescent skin flickering with agitation, turned to Admiral Elias Kane, who stood calmly amidst the chaos. Kane's expression was unreadable, his eyes fixed on the battle unfolding outside the station. "Is this what you call modest?" Zyroth demanded, his voice sharp, though there was an undercurrent of something else, fear. Admiral Kane did not respond immediately. He clasped his hands behind his back, his posture relaxed, his gaze steady. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but carrying an undeniable weight. "Let them wonder," he said simply. Back on the battlefield, the Krithar's desperation grew. They fired wildly, their crimson beams slicing through the void in a futile attempt to regain control. But the human ships moved with precision and purpose, their every action calculated, their every strike devastating. The Aegis led the charge, its quantum resonance shield shimmering as it absorbed blow after blow. Behind it, the other human ships pressed the attack, their weapons cutting through the Krithar fleet like blades through paper. The station's grand hall, once filled with the sounds of panic and chaos, was now silent. The alien delegates stood frozen, their eyes fixed on the viewport. They had come to this meeting expecting to witness humanity's weakness, to see them humbled before the might of the Concord. Instead, they were seeing something else entirely. Humanity was not weak. They were not primitive. They were a force to be reckoned with, a species that had clawed its way out of the dirt and into the stars, carrying with them a determination that burned brighter than any sun. As the last of the Krithar ships was destroyed or disabled, a heavy silence fell over the battlefield. The void of space, once filled with the chaos of battle, was now eerily still. The human ships regrouped, their sleek forms shining in the light of the nearby stars. On the Aegis, Captain Arias O'Lees allowed herself a moment to breathe. Her hands, steady and strong, rested on the railing as she surveyed the battlefield. Her heart still pounded in her chest, but her expression was calm, her eyes filled with quiet determination. "We've shown them," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now they know." And as the human fleet returned to formation, their victory undeniable, the galaxy watched in silence, its perception of humanity forever changed. The battlefield was a graveyard of shattered ships and drifting debris, the remnants of the Krithar fleet scattered like broken bones across the void. Yet, amidst their defeat, the Krithar were not finished. Their pride, their desperation, demanded one final act of defiance. From the shadows of their remaining vessels, a sinister glow began to pulse, an ominous, blood-red light that grew brighter with every passing second. The Krithar ships, battered and crippled, began to drift toward the station, their movements deliberate and menacing. Inside the station, the alien delegates watched in mounting horror. They knew what this meant. The Krithar were overloading their reactors, preparing to turn their ships into bombs. The energy released would be catastrophic, enough to obliterate the station and everyone within it. Panic erupted once more. The Concorde's fleet, massive but slow, began to retreat. Their captains barked orders to fall back, their ships moving away from the station in a desperate attempt to avoid the impending blast. The Krithar's intent was clear: if they could not win, they would take their enemies with them. On the bridge of the Pioneer, Captain Tessa Rain stood motionless for a moment, her sharp eyes fixed on the approaching Krithar ships. The glow of their overloaded reactors reflected faintly in her pupils, a reminder of the destruction that was only moments away. The voices of her crew filled the air around her, urgent, frightened, pleading for orders. "Captain, the Concorde ships are retreating. We need to dash." No, her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. It was calm, steady, but beneath it lay an unshakable resolve. She turned to face her crew, her expression hardened by the weight of the decision she was about to make. "We're not running." The crew stared at her, their fear giving way to confusion. "But, Captain, the explosion dash." "We're going to stop it," Tessa said firmly. "Prepare the Aegis field." A stunned silence followed her words. The Aegis field was powerful, yes, but it had never been tested against something of this magnitude. To use it now, against such overwhelming energy, was madness. "Captain," her first officer began, his voice trembling, "if it fails dash." "It won't," she interrupted, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I won't let it." The crew hesitated for only a moment longer before springing into action. They trusted her. They had to. The Pioneer moved into position, placing itself between the station and the advancing Krithar ships. Its sleek hull gleamed faintly in the light of the station's distant sun, a lone sentinel standing against the tide of destruction. Inside the ship, the air was thick with tension. The crew worked in near silence, their movements precise and deliberate. They could feel the weight of every second, the ticking clock that counted down to their possible annihilation. "Field activation in 5 seconds, a voice announced. Tessa stood at the center of the bridge, her hands clasped behind her back. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her face betrayed no fear. She watched as the Krithar ships drew closer, their reactors blazing like dying stars. 4. The station loomed behind her ship, its surface dotted with the lights of countless lives that depended on her. 3. The Krithar ships were close now, their hulking forms filling the viewport. The glow of their reactors was blinding, a searing red that seemed to burn into her eyes. 2. Tessa exhaled slowly, her gaze unflinching. 1. A brilliant light erupted from the Pioneer, engulfing the ship in a dome of shimmering energy. The Aegis field expanded outward, its surface rippling like water, until it surrounded the station in a protective shell. The Krithar ships detonated. The explosion was blinding, a wave of fire and energy that surged outward with unstoppable force. The shock wave tore through space, consuming everything in its path. The delegates on the station shielded their eyes, their bodies bracing for the impact they knew would come. But it didn't. The energy struck the Aegis field and stopped. The dome shimmered and pulsed, absorbing the full force of the explosion. For a moment, it seemed as though the field might break, its surface flickering under the strain. But it held. The energy dissipated, its fury reduced to nothingness. Inside the station, the aliens slowly uncovered their eyes. What they saw left them speechless. The Pioneer remained, its hull glowing faintly in the aftermath of the blast. The station was untouched, the Aegis field still shimmering around it like a guardian's embrace. The Velaran engineer, his translucent skin glowing faintly with astonishment, whispered, "This technology, it defies everything we know." The Oravan scientist beside him nodded, her crystalline form trembling with awe. They shouldn't be capable of this. No one should. High Commander Xyrath turned to Admiral Kane, his glowing eyes filled with something that might have been fear or perhaps respect. "How?" he demanded quietly. "How do they do this?" Kane's expression was calm, his voice steady as he replied, "Because we have to. Because we don't have the luxury of failure." On the Pioneer, Tessa Rain allowed herself a small, weary smile. Her body sagged slightly, the weight of the moment finally catching up to her. But her eyes remained bright, her spirit unbroken. "We're still here," she murmured to herself, her voice barely audible. "That's all that matters." And as the light of the Aegis field faded, leaving the station and its inhabitants unharmed, the galaxy bore witness to the resilience of humanity, a species that refused to be extinguished, no matter the odds. The battlefield was quiet now, the silence heavy and almost sacred after the chaos that had unfolded. The Krithar fleet, broken and humiliated, slinked into the dark reaches of space, their retreat marked by the faint glimmer of their engines disappearing into the void. The air within the station was still tense, but it was no longer the tension of fear. It was something else, a quiet, thoughtful unease, as if the universe itself had shifted in some profound way. The alien delegates, who had once looked down upon humanity with thinly veiled disdain or outright mockery, now stood in silence, their eyes lingering on the human fleet outside the station. The ships, though smaller and fewer in number than the Concorde's massive armada, carried an undeniable presence. They hovered in formation, their sleek designs gleaming faintly under the distant starlight, a testament to their resilience and ingenuity. High Commander Xyrath, who had been one of the most vocal in his skepticism of humanity, stood near the viewport. His bioluminescent skin flickered faintly, the soft glow betraying the storm of thoughts swirling within him. His sharp, angular features, once twisted into an expression of superiority, now seemed subdued, even contemplative. He turned, his gaze falling on Admiral Elias Kane, who stood a short distance away. Kane's posture was as composed as ever, his hands clasped neatly behind his back, his expression calm and unreadable. The human admiral's uniform was simple, unadorned compared to the elaborate attire of the Concorde representatives, but somehow, in this moment, it carried more weight than any ceremonial regalia ever could. Xyrath hesitated for a moment, as if struggling to find the right words. Finally, he stepped forward, his voice low but steady. "Your fleet, your people, are not what we expected." It was a simple statement, but the weight behind it was immense. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. The other delegates turned their attention to the exchange, their curiosity and unease palpable. Admiral Kane regarded Xyrath with a measured gaze. There was no trace of triumph in his expression, no smugness or arrogance. When he spoke, his tone was calm, almost humble, but with an underlying strength that could not be ignored. "Earth has always thrived under pressure," he said. "For us, survival has never been guaranteed. We've had to adapt, to innovate, to find strength in our limitations. Efficiency and innovation aren't luxuries for us, they are necessities." His words hung in the air, resonating with a quiet power. The aliens listened intently, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, respect, and something else, something closer to understanding. Xyrath inclined his head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement that felt almost reverent. "It seems we misjudged you," he admitted. "We saw your size, your numbers, and we assumed weakness. But now I see, there is strength in your resolve, in your ability to endure." Kane nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Misjudgments are inevitable when we don't take the time to understand one another. But understanding is why we're here, isn't it? To build something better together." The words were simple, but they carried a sincerity that was impossible to ignore. The room, which had once been filled with tense whispers and quiet derision, now felt different. The alien delegates exchanged glances, their previous skepticism replaced with a cautious openness. The Vilaran engineer, who had earlier marveled at the humans' technology, stepped forward. Her translucent skin shimmered faintly, her voice soft but clear. "Your technology, it is unlike anything we've seen. It defies our understanding." Kane smiled faintly, his gaze steady. "We've learned to work with what we have. Necessity is the mother of invention, after all." The Vilaran tilted her head thoughtfully. "And yet, you do not flaunt it? You do not use it to dominate or intimidate. Why?" Kane's expression grew more serious. "Because power without purpose is meaningless. We don't seek to conquer or control. We seek to survive, to grow, and to live in peace. That's all we've ever wanted." The room fell silent again, the weight of his words settling over the delegates. For the first time, they began to see humanity not as a primitive, reckless species, but as something more, a people forged in the crucible of hardship, tempered by adversity, and driven not by greed or ambition, but by a simple, unyielding desire to endure. "We will share what we can," Kane continued, his tone diplomatic but firm. "But there are things we must protect, things we cannot give freely. Not because we distrust you, but because we must ensure our survival above all else. I hope you can understand that." Xyrath nodded slowly, his glowing eyes meeting Kane's. "I do," he said quietly. "And I believe others will, too." The shift in the room was almost tangible. Where there had once been skepticism and condescension, there was now respect, even admiration. The delegates began to murmur among themselves, their voices no longer tinged with doubt, but with curiosity and a cautious hope. Humanity, they realized, was not a threat to be feared, but a potential ally to be valued. A species that had risen from the brink of extinction time and time again, and yet had chosen cooperation over conquest, resilience over ruthlessness. As the meeting continued, the barriers between the species began to erode, replaced by the first fragile threads of understanding. And while the road ahead would not be easy, one thing was clear: humanity had earned its place among the stars, not through power or dominance, but through the strength of its spirit and the depth of its resolve. The station hung in the void, a wounded giant slowly mending itself. Its once pristine structure bore the scars of the battle-darkened hulls, twisted metal, and faintly glowing fractures that pulsed with unstable energy. Yet, amidst this destruction, there was movement, purpose, and hope. The hum of activity filled the air, a symphony of alien and human hands working side by side to restore what had been broken. In the heart of the station, where the reactor lay damaged and volatile, a team of scientists gathered. The reactor core, a massive, pulsating sphere of energy, flickered erratically, each unstable pulse sending ripples of tension through the room. The alien engineers whispered among themselves, their voices tinged with unease. They had tried everything they knew, every method their advanced civilizations had perfected over centuries, yet the core remained unstable on the brink of collapse. Dr. Lyra Cashin stepped forward, her figure dwarfed by the towering alien engineers around her. Her hair was tied back, her face streaked with sweat and grime, but her eyes burned with determination. She studied the reactor with a quiet intensity, her mind racing through possibilities. To the aliens, she seemed impossibly small, fragile even, but there was something in her presence that commanded attention. "What are you doing, human?" one of the Velaran engineers asked, his voice laced with skepticism. His translucent skin shimmered faintly in the dim light, betraying his unease. Lyra didn't look up. "Thinking," she replied simply, her voice calm but firm. She stepped closer to the reactor, her gaze fixed on the chaotic energy patterns swirling within. "This isn't just about stabilizing the core. It's about redirecting the energy, giving it a controlled path to follow." The Velaran frowned, his glowing eyes narrowing. "We've already tried containment fields and energy dampeners. Nothing works." Lyra finally turned to face him, a faint smile playing at the corners of her lips. "That's because you're trying to suppress it. Energy like this doesn't want to be contained, it wants to move. If we give it a path, a way to flow naturally, we can stabilize it without forcing it into submission." Her words hung in the air, met with a mixture of confusion and intrigue. The aliens exchanged glances, their skepticism slowly giving way to curiosity. Lyra's confidence was infectious, her belief in her idea unwavering. "Show us," the Velaran said at last, his voice quieter now, almost respectful. Lyra nodded and began to explain her plan, her hands moving animatedly as she sketched diagrams on a nearby console. She spoke in simple, direct terms, her words cutting through the alien engineer's doubts like a blade. She proposed rerouting the unstable energy into a series of auxiliary conduits, creating a network of controlled pathways that would allow the reactor to stabilize itself. It was a concept the aliens had never considered, their advanced technology often favoring brute force solutions over adaptability. As the team worked to implement her plan, the tension in the room was palpable. The reactor pulsed erratically, each unstable surge a reminder of the stakes. Yet, amidst the pressure, Lyra remained calm, her focus unwavering. She moved among the engineers, adjusting their calculations, offering guidance, and occasionally cracking a wry joke to ease the tension. Slowly but surely, the chaotic energy began to settle, its wild pulses smoothing into a steady rhythm. When the reactor finally stabilized, a collective sigh of relief swept through the room. The Velaran engineer turned to Lyra, his luminous eyes wide with astonishment. "You did it," he said softly, his voice filled with something that sounded almost like awe. "You actually did it?" Lyra smiled, her exhaustion evident but overshadowed by triumph. "We did it," she corrected, her gaze sweeping over the team. "This wasn't just me. It was all of us." Meanwhile, in another part of the station, Lieutenant Nova Clark stood before a group of alien technicians, her hands moving deftly as she demonstrated a repair technique. The aliens watched her with rapt attention, their expressions a mix of fascination and disbelief. Nova's movements were quick and precise, her hands coated in grease as she worked on a damaged conduit. "This isn't about perfection," she explained, her voice steady but warm. "It's about improvisation. Sometimes, you don't have the exact tools or materials you need, so you make do with what you have. It's not pretty, but it works." One of the alien technicians, a towering Oravan with crystalline skin, tilted his head. "Your methods are unconventional," he said slowly. but effective. Nova grinned, wiping her hands on her uniform. That's humanity in a nutshell. We adapt, we improvise, and we find solutions where none seem possible. The aliens nodded, their respect for the humans growing with each passing moment. They had always viewed humanity as a lesser species, primitive and unsophisticated, but now they saw something they hadn't before: a resilience, a creativity, and a resourcefulness that defied their expectations. When the repairs were finally complete, the station stood stronger than before, its wounds healed through the combined efforts of humans and aliens alike. The Concord representatives gathered once more, their demeanor markedly different from before. The skepticism and condescension that had once filled the room were gone, replaced by respect and a newfound sense of camaraderie. High Commander Zyrith stepped forward, his glowing eyes meeting Admiral Kane's. "Humanity has proven itself today," he said, his voice solemn. "Your ingenuity, your adaptability, your willingness to work alongside us, these are qualities we cannot ignore." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the human delegation. "The Concord would be honored to welcome Earth as a full member. Your strengths are unique, and we believe they will only strengthen our alliance." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. The alien delegates nodded, their expressions warm and sincere. Humanity, once viewed as an outsider, had earned its place among the stars not through force or dominance, but through cooperation, ingenuity, and an unyielding spirit. Admiral Kane inclined his head, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "We accept your invitation with gratitude. Together, we can achieve far more than any of us could alone." As the meeting concluded, there was a sense of something new in the air, a fragile but growing bond between species, a shared hope for a brighter future. And at the heart of it all was humanity, a species that had risen from the ashes of its own struggles to stand as a beacon of resilience and innovation in a vast and uncertain galaxy. The stars stretched endlessly in the void, their cold light a stark reminder of the challenges that lay ahead. The Krithar may have retreated, but their absence left no comfort, only the heavy certainty that they would return, stronger and more determined than before. The Concord Council knew this, as did humanity. The victory they had achieved together was not the end of the war, it was merely the beginning of a much larger struggle. Admiral Kane stood on the observation deck of the Concord station, his gaze fixed on the vastness of space. His reflection in the glass was a solemn figure, his features hardened by the weight of responsibility. Around him, the hum of activity never ceased. Engineers, diplomats, and strategists from countless species moved with purpose, their voices blending into a low murmur that filled the air. Kane's mind churned with plans. He saw the path ahead clearly, the steps humanity would need to take to secure its place in this dangerous galaxy. The Krithar were a force of chaos, relentless and unyielding, and the only way to stand against them was through unity, through strength born of cooperation. The Concord fleets were already adapting. Alien commanders studied human battle tactics with fascination, their rigid doctrines giving way to the creativity and improvisation that had allowed humanity to survive for so long. Kane had personally overseen the sharing of certain technologies, limited, of course, but enough to demonstrate humanity's willingness to contribute. In one of the station's many training halls, a group of Concord soldiers practiced maneuvers under the guidance of Lieutenant Nova Clark. Her voice rang out, sharp and commanding, as she drilled them in techniques that seemed almost reckless to the aliens but proved devastatingly effective in simulated battles. "Don't just follow the pattern," she barked, her piercing gaze sweeping over the trainees. "Think. Adapt. The Krithar won't wait for you to execute a perfect formation, they'll exploit every hesitation, every predictable move. If you want to survive, you need to outthink them." The soldiers nodded, their expressions a mixture of determination and awe. Nova's fiery passion was undeniable, and her words carried the weight of hard-earned experience. The aliens, once skeptical of humanity's unconventional ways, now listened intently, their respect for the humans growing with each passing day. In the depths of the station, Dr. Lyra Cashin continued her work with alien scientists, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Together, they developed new technologies, hybrids of human ingenuity and alien precision that would give the Concorde an edge in the battles to come. Lyra's mind was a whirlwind of ideas, her hands never still as she sketched designs and tested theories. The aliens marveled at her creativity, often wondering how such a small, fragile being could hold so much brilliance. But amidst the flurry of activity, there was an undercurrent of unease. The Krithar were not a foe to be underestimated. Their return was inevitable, and the question lingered in everyone's mind, would they be ready? Kane knew there was no room for complacency. He called a meeting of the Concorde Council, his voice calm but firm as he outlined his vision for the future. "We cannot afford to wait for the Krithar to strike again," he said, his gaze sweeping over the gathered leaders. "We must be proactive. Humanity has faced extinction before, and we've learned that survival depends on preparation. Together, we can build something stronger than any of us could achieve alone." The council listened, their expressions thoughtful. Kane's words carried a quiet power, a conviction that resonated with them. They had seen what humanity was capable of, and now they began to understand that this small, resilient species could be the key to their survival. As the meeting concluded, a sense of purpose filled the room. The Concorde fleets would be ready. Humanity would be ready. And when the Krithar returned, they would face a united force, one that would not falter. The journey back to Earth was a quiet one. The 5 human ships glided through the stars, their sleek forms a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of the species that had built them. Inside, the crews were subdued, their thoughts heavy with the weight of what they had accomplished and what still lay ahead. Captain Arias-O'Lee stood on the bridge of her ship, her hands clasped behind her back as she gazed out at the endless expanse. The stars seemed brighter now, as if the universe itself acknowledged humanity's triumph. But Arya's expression was pensive, her thoughts drifting to the battles they had fought and the lives they had lost. "They laughed at us," she murmured, her voice soft but steady. "They mocked our ships, our tactics, our very existence. But laughter is fleeting. What matters is what comes after." Her words hung in the air, resonating with the crew. They had been underestimated, dismissed as insignificant, but they had proven themselves in ways that no one could deny. Humanity, once seen as a fragile and primitive species, had risen to stand among the stars as equals. When the ships finally reached Earth, they were greeted as heroes. The planet's surface glittered with lights, a celebration of their return. Crowds gathered to watch as the ships descended, their cheers echoing across the cities. For the first time in generations, humanity felt a sense of pride, a belief that they could not only survive but thrive in the vastness of space. Admiral Kane stood before a massive screen, his expression calm but resolute as he addressed Earth High Command. "Operation Silent Roar successful," he said, his voice steady. "Terra stands ready for the stars." The message was simple, but its implications were profound. Humanity was no longer a solitary voice in the void. They were part of something greater now, a member of a galactic alliance that would shape the future of the universe. As the celebrations continued, Arya found herself standing alone on a balcony, gazing up at the night sky. The stars seemed closer now, their light more vivid than ever. She thought of the Krithar, of the challenges that still lay ahead, but she felt no fear. Humanity had faced the darkness before, and they would face it again. In the vastness of space, one truth had become clear: humanity's greatest strength was not its technology or its numbers, but its ability to adapt, to innovate, and to rise above expectations. And so, beneath the endless expanse of stars, a new chapter began, a story of hope, unity, and the unyielding spirit of a species that refused to be defined by its limits. Humanity had ascended, not through conquest, but through resilience, cooperation, and the quiet strength that had carried them through the darkest of times. The stars were no longer out of reach. They were a promise, a reminder that, in the face of the infinite, humanity would always find a way to rise.